Fellow Ghanaians, good morning. So this morning, we will all be watching on as Bernard Nkwibo-Siako, known as Chairman Wontumi, is expected to be arraigned on 3 counts related to illegal mining in connection with activities that have been attributed to his company, Akonta Mining. We must begin by saying what must be said plainly. No one is above the law. Everyone is entitled to their day in court. And I do not pronounce guilt or innocence here. But the spectacle of his appearance must be used for something far greater than gossip or partisan glee. It must mark a decisive shift in how this country prosecutes the people at the top of the galamsey food chain. Because until we follow the money, we crush the financiers and prosecute without fear or favor the wealthy masterminds who profit from this environmental devastation, every bulldozed pit and every cleared camp will simply be a temporary victory. A photo for the timelines, and the poisoned rivers, the lost farmlands, and the ruined futures of children will remain the permanent cost. Fellow Ghanaians, we must make no mistake. The men and women swinging shovels in the rivers and the forests are culpable and must be punished. The arrests and prosecutions are necessary, but they are not sufficient, because for every handful of miners you prosecute today, I can assure you, a fresh troop will queue up tomorrow to take up the cash and rent the jacks to sell their labor in a desperate economy if the same financiers who pay for the machines and buy the gold remain untouched. If the financiers who proceed to launder this money through shadow companies and their politician friends remain free and wealthy, then the violence against the land will continue in new forms and in new places. Because a chain is only as weak as its strongest link. And to break galamsey, we must cut the chain at the very head. If you want to understand the scale of the crime, picture this. Entire watersheds have been turned into brown slurries of sediment and chemical poison. Children who will face lifelong health problems because mercury and cyanide were poured into rivers upstream of their villages. Cocoa farms have now been rendered useless, fisheries destroyed, and the consequent public health crisis that will cost the state more than any short-term revenue that will be generated by these clandestine gold deals. And yet the penalties for these acts look paltry. That is compared to other social harm that is inflicted. So we need to ask with the earnestness of a man who sees his future being stolen. If a citizen murders another in cold blood, that is crime enough, and is liable to life imprisonment, formerly would have been death, why can a corporate or a political actor who orders the poisoning of whole communities expect anything different? We must have prosecutions that are swift and unyielding, prosecutions that distinguish the petty foot soldiers on the grounds from the architects, prosecutions that go beyond paper and charges and leads to asset freezes, confiscation, and transparent recovery that returns value to communities that have been destroyed by these crimes. Prosecutions that display the same ferocity we reserve for violent crimes, because we need not make any mistake. Poisoning a river with mercury and cyanide is slow-motion mass murder of an entire community and its future generations. It deserves the same moral weight and the same legal zeal. This means a few things immediately and unequivocally. First, the state must stop treating illegal mining as some political problem only. It is fundamentally a financial crime and a national security crisis that we must mobilize prosecutors, anti-money laundering units, financial intelligence, tax authorities, customs, and international partners to trace the proceeds, to follow the accounts, seize the properties, the luxury cars, the financial holdings, the corporate shares and the bank accounts that reveal the flow of illicit revenue. Until the gold changes hands from artisanal pockets into the hands of big purchasers, the launderers will never choke off the trade. And those purchasers must be identified. We must freeze them, we must prosecute them, and their assets must be forfeited to restoring the damaged environment they've caused. Then again, we need special fast-track courts for illegal mining and related financial crimes. It's been said so much. But this must not be a pretext for abridging rights, but precisely because we need to ensure that the law is not starved by procedural liturgy, because delay is justice denied, and it is delay that allows the politically connected to outweigh accountability, delay that encourages political interference and the evaporation of evidence. So we must insist that criminal matters linked to illegal mining, money laundering from mineral sales, the misuse of heavy equipment in foreign reserves should be heard in specialized divisions with judges and prosecutors trained in environmental crime and financial investigations with statutory timetables so that the cases move from charges to verdicts within months, not years. Then again, we must be very hard on asset recovery. It must be front and center of a fight against illegal mining. It is not enough to win a conviction and issue a headline. The state must secure court-ordered freezing of assets as soon as charges are filed. It must use the emergency powers that we have as a state to restrain where these properties have been gained unlawfully. It must employ mutual legal assistance with partner jurisdictions to block the flight of proceeds. And it must convert these into assets swiftly with funds dedicated to remediation of degraded lands. Farmers who have been displaced must be supported. Their families and communities must be restored, which will in return give them back their livelihoods, those ones that have been destroyed. Because convictions are hollow without reparative justice. Then the state must build and strengthen its investigative acumen. They must equip the Financial Intelligence Center to prioritize mineral-related flows. Where is the money coming from? Where is it going? Tax these investigative agencies with forensic accounting units that can track payments to shell companies and straw buyers, compel banks to report suspicious transactions with no favorites, and use digital traces, cell phone metadata, mobile money trails, custom imports. These people are importing this machinery. You must track all of these to demonstrate the link between kingpins and the crews in the rivers. Because gold leaves traces, and the state must learn to read them. Then there must be witness protection and whistleblower incentives, which must be robust. A culture of silence fuels galamsey as much as greed. Insiders know the names and the processing routes, but they fear retaliation. They fear political repercussion. They fear that the families will pay and the price they will pay if they speak out. So the state must create a secure pipeline where whistleblowers can give actionable intelligence anonymously. It should offer financial protection and relocation of key witnesses. And then it should introduce legal and fiscal rewards for information that leads to successful prosecution and asset recovery. These are basic things. So why are the people in power, the ones we pay so much, why can't they seem to figure out these matters? Because this is the only way we can win the fight against illegal mining. And I say this also again with some specificity and with some anger. The law must treat the use of toxic chemicals in these water bodies as an extreme offense with scaled penalties proportionate to the damage. Environmental statutes must now be tightened. We need new rules for the willful and reckless introduction of mercury and cyanide into water bodies. We must classify them not just as misdemeanors or merely an administrative infraction, but as major criminal acts with mandatory custodial sentences, heavy fines, and rehabilitation orders that require that the convicted person funds the cleanup and ecological restoration for a period commensurate with the harm that has been done. Because in the present legal architecture, we treat the destruction of ecosystems as if they were some minor regulatory slips rather than an assault on national survival. So we must go hard on illegal mining. We must continue to get to the point where we see this for the problem that it is. So when a site is cleared, the state must immediately invest in alternatives, youth employment programs, agro-processing hubs, cooperative mining schemes that are truly legal and properly regulated, microfinance for agri investment, and fast-track land restoration projects that put people to work, remediating degraded land. Only then will you remove the incentive to return. Leaving communities without the alternatives is tantamount to opening a recruitment ground for the next wave of illegal miners. That is how you deal with illegal mining, not by the pick and choose that we are doing. The political elite must stop providing cover, implicit or explicit, for the big players. If we are to end galamsey, no friend of a politician, no chief who backs a particular operation, No business persona with political ties must be immune. Enforcement must be blind to party and status. And if the state wants credibility, it must demonstrate that through prosecutions, that the big players, the wealthy and influential people, are subject to the same rule of law as the poor and the powerless, who are on these sides simply because the government has in the end failed to create jobs for them. Because if you don't, and you just arrest the petty boys and girls on these illegal mining sites, a horde of these young people will be ready to move in and do the same thing. This is why the case involving Chairman Wontumi and Akonta Mining and this arraignment this morning of Chairman Wontumi is in particular very important. Because we must handle these cases with procedural integrity and prosecutorial independence, which the public can see. Because if this trial that is going to start today delay and the charges are dropped for some procedural pretext, if the accused are allowed to walk away with an apology or some handshake, then the message will be vivid and corrosive. The big men are untouchable. There's nothing, absolutely nothing, the state will do to clear these sites will hold water. We do not have to, get me wrong, we are not in the camp of those who believe President John Dramani Mahamat's government has done anything. In fact, to the contrary, in 9 months since he took office, there's been some brisk responses that we saw in the last few years. And I acknowledge that when citizens report sites today where there are illegal mining going on, security people move in, they clear these illegal pits, and certain ministers, in particular, regional minister like the Ashanti regional minister, has shown some real agency that progress must be recognized because it demonstrates that political will can yield action. But the truth is also unavoidable. Clearing is not enough. We must prosecute. We must do so aggressively, or we will simply delay the next disaster while the underlying criminal networks continue to flourish. We have a stark historical lesson in the politics of inaction. When powerful interests are allowed to defend their operations publicly, or when the state bends to influence and rhetoric, the rot only deepens. You cannot remember a long list of photos of ribbon cuttings and evasions as proof of governance while the rivers die quietly and the soil turns to desert. And if in the past some governments publicly defended accused mining companies against overwhelming evidence, those days must be over. And they will be over only when every top buyer, pawnbroker, and financial backer of this illegal mining sees the inside of a courtroom and finds their assets frozen and seized. So for me, what does an aggressive prosecution strategy look like operationally? It looks like immediate seizure, forensic inventory of excavators, generators, fuel stocks, and associated equipment at alleged sites, immediate freezing of bank accounts and corporate shareholdings. That gives probable cause. There must be mutual legal assistance from jurisdictions where laundered proceeds may be stashed. Joint task forces of the Attorney General's Office, the Financial Intelligence Center, the Ghana Revenue Authority, and the police CID, specialized prosecutors to build airtight money laundering cases. Fast-track indictment with some timelines, because we cannot have these cases going the same length as some cases that we have seen, traveling 8 years in the court. That is how you deal with Galamsey. So fellow Ghanaians, this morning the message is simple. You cannot fight Galamsey the same way you've been dealing with other crimes. You must go out there and you must fight this as aggressively as possible. You need to cut the snake, kill it from the head. If you cut the tail, it will wriggle away and cause the same problems. That is how you win against Galamsey, dear Mahama. That is how you show that you mean different and that ultimately the things that we have seen in the past, we're just not going to repeat ourselves. I'll see you again same time tomorrow. Good morning.